It's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another episode of VETchat, the UK's #1 veterinary podcast. And I'm really thrilled today to have Paul van der Lingen with me in the podcast. Paul is a director in the office of the CTO of NetApp. NetApp, probably a company you've not heard of, but we will introduce that later. And Paul has a particular interest and responsibility for sustainability. Why, would you ask, would a company that's virtualized, that's looking after people's data, storing and sharing and protecting the world's data as the strapline goes, why would that company, which is obviously virtual, even have to bother about thinking about sustainability? But we're going to go into that during the podcast. But first of all, Paul, welcome and thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Great, Paul. I'm sure everybody is picking up a slight twang there, but maybe you can tell us a bit about your background and the slight accent you have there.
I'm a bit of a mongrel. By my grandparents, I'm a mixture of English, Irish, Dutch, and Scottish. I was born and mostly raised in Zimbabwe. Finished high school and university in South Africa. Lived in Reading for a number of years. Did a very short stint in Belgium that we don't talk about in polite company. And now I've lived here in the Netherlands for coming up for 15 years. So it's a pretty mixed, it's a good mix. I did actually have a lady on a flight once. She sat next to me and she said, "You went to," and then she named my school, Marlborough Primary School. "You went to Marlborough Primary School, probably," and she guessed the year. I was like, "How on earth do you know that?" She says, "Because when I close my eyes, it's my husband speaking." Yeah. So I'm not as unique as I thought.
Yeah, it's an accent thing, but a beautiful country. I spent some time there when I was a student, traveling around country. And also doing some work. And beautiful country. I'm sure a very happy childhood growing up in that sort of Harare. Was it Harare that you grew up in?
Yeah, I grew up in Harare. Yeah, my father was head of the fisheries division of Parks and Wildlife, so we spent a great deal of time in the national parks, which was just, I can't think of a better way to grow up.
Yeah, I remember being in Wangi National Park, driving into the park in the early morning and seeing a troop of about 6 or 7 wild dogs just stop and look at us. We've got a beautiful photograph of it, and then they wandered off. One of the
fantastic,
unfortunately, the rarest of the carnivores in Africa. So it was just a great blessing to be able to see them.
Fantastic. We spent most of our time in the national parks that were on the east coast, on the eastern border, where they were developing the fisheries, inland fisheries. That's what my father was responsible. Very clear memory when I was about 6 years of age, being taught how to fly fish. Yeah. And first with no hook, because it was across my face and my body and everything. And then I don't think it took me 3 days, and now I can cast and everything. So skillful life.
I'm sure you brought some, your father or yourself brought some exotic animals into the house as well. A la Gerald Durrell.
Yeah, my father was a character. Actually, it's his birthday today. He died a few years ago, but today is his birthday. And he brought in, I think I must have been 7 or 8, and I don't really know why he did this. He came home one day with some crocodiles, and we ended up with crocodiles as pets. And I can tell you that you can train and feed and do anything you want to with a crocodile, and every day the crocodile will still think of you as food.
But at a certain size, they're quite cute and cuddly, aren't they? But it's when they get bigger, then they're not so cute and cuddly.
Well, ours stayed with us until they were about 150 centimeters, and then my dad assured us they went back to the Zambezi. Well,
who knows?
Possibly somebody's shoes, but he did promise that they went back to the Zambezi. So
I remember when I was 5, I went away for my first holiday abroad. And when I came back, my nana who lived with us and my auntie who lived with us, they told me the sad news that the budgie had escaped from the cage and flew off. And my memory, being a bird watcher, and even at that age of being aware of all the sparrows that we had in the neighbourhood, was that the sparrows had then hounded this budgie to death. And it haunted me a little bit until I got to about 16, when I was sitting at the table one day and they just said, "Oh yeah," and we got home and the budgie was dead in the bottom of the cage. And they decided not just to tell me the truth, but to make up a story. So parents can be mean like that, or older relatives. But anyway, we missed the point. We missed the point.
That's right.
We're not here
That's
to
right.
talk about crocodiles and budgies, I'm sure. Tell us a little bit about NetApp, a company that I'm sure probably very few people, if any, will have heard of on the call. But obviously, working with some really big companies, and perhaps tell us a bit about what you do.
I'd imagine NetApp is the biggest company that most people haven't heard of. We're a multi-billion-dollar company. Every time you do a transaction with a bank or with an airline or with an insurance company or with, the production line of your favorite manufacturing car manufacturer, it produces data. The transactions. You make a phone call, and there's the locator record for where you are, what the time would do, what cell station it was, what number two, what from. That's data. That data has to then be stored. Might have value. It has to be shared and protected. Make sure people who should have access to it can access it. Make sure people who don't have access to it can't get access to it. It needs to be turned into something useful or backed up. And all of that is what we refer to as an intelligent data architecture, intelligent data infrastructure. And this is what NetApp do. We provide the hardware and the software. If you're one of those big telcos or banks, you probably have some data centers, and you buy some of our hardware and you put it in your data center and you connect it up to your computers, and we do that thing I just described.
Yeah.
And then perhaps also you want to take it into the cloud. Well, we have software that does the same up in the cloud there. So yeah, we have billions of bytes of data that we manage.
I remember going back to my veterinary practice, and we obviously got computers in when I opened it. That was 97, so 20 odd years ago. But we had a really, really big server that threw off a lot of heat and was obviously, looking after our own system because we weren't connected to the cloud. So obviously, developing the cloud and making things like practice management systems for veterinary practices, doctors, surgeries, etc., being available in the cloud makes it much more efficient, I would imagine. And of course, if your server breaks, then you've lost all your data. Whereas presumably when things are stored in the cloud, I know we have Amazon Web Services, they're stored in different places. So you're you're going to be very unfortunate to lose data. So it makes it much more efficient. And I would imagine in a way it saves energy as well, because these heavy computers always felt very hot and were obviously using a lot of electricity, I presume. So I presume taking things into the cloud has made it more energy efficient. But of course, as we store more and more data, as things go exponential, more and more data is produced and needs to be stored. We must get to a point where the amount of data being stored and the energy that is needed to store that is becoming enormous, isn't it? I know a lot of data centers are now in the northern hemisphere because it's cooler and they can be kept cooler. So that's obviously presumably led to some problems, which is why NetApp now have a head of sustainability like yourself.
There's quite a bit to unpack there.
Yeah, I probably made it a bit too simplistic, so I apologize.
No. The cloud is a fascinating thing, right? So I used to talk. I would have customer meetings with 15 customers, and I'd say, "Who gives me a definition of the cloud?" And I would get 15 definitions, right? So what really is the cloud? It's the most simplistic is it's just somebody else's computers that your applications are running on. That is one definition. The other is the cloud is a mindset and a way of you being able to operate in an operational as opposed to a capex based model. So you use as you need, you shut down when you don't need. And obviously there are giants in that space. Amazon, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, IBM are pretty enormous in that space as well. It doesn't automatically mean that they are more energy efficient, and it doesn't automatically mean that they are more environmentally sustainable. What we've seen over the time is that when they focus, those hyperscale organizations, when they focus on something, they do it brilliantly, right? You have something of the scale of that, and they turn their energies to doing something, to being more cost effective, or perhaps they turn their energies to giving customers better tools for creating exciting new applications, or whatever it is that they become brilliant. But the world has only recently started demanding that we know what is happening in those data centers around our energy use. So if you put an application into a cloud, any cloud, I think you have an expectation and a right to know what the energy cost is of running that. And in a shared everything infrastructure, that's really quite difficult to do. If you consider that a cloud is always oversubscribed, so you have 100 units of something being shared by however many people, how do you do the allocation of the energy? Is it based on a second? Is it based on what you think you bought? Is it based on billing? It's not as, when you unpack it, it gets quite complicated to do. And we've seen that cloud continues to grow enormously. Absolutely Billy crazy cloud is growing. But we also are seeing that some organizations are moving data back from the cloud, and they're moving it into data centers that they have specifically designed to be super clean, super green. And I'm going to do a shameless punt for a friend of mine. There's an organization run by a very charismatic guy, Mark Bjornsgaard, called Deep Green. And Mark is extremely passionate about decarbonizing technology. So he builds data centers in the UK next to public swimming pools, and he uses the heat that is a waste product from the data centers, and he heats the swimming pools. And now they're moving into area heating, district heating, being able to do really cool and clever things. And the efficiencies that they can achieve as a result of that is simply unmatched. And I mean, I was shameless in my plug of Deep Green, but there are many organizations that are doing things like that. These next generation thinkers, these next generation of people who are going, we cannot keep doing what we have always done and expect a different outcome, right? Essentially. So it's really cool that I have this opportunity to work with some of these wacky, crazy people who come up with these really brilliant ideas.
It's really interesting. I've just done a certificate with Cambridge Vet School, and McKinsey came up with a report, and they talked about the Resolve framework, and the L in Resolve stands for loop, and of course it's closing loops. And
closing loops,
this is where circularity is really beautiful. If you can have something, waste is only waste if we don't know what to do with it.
right.
So to waste energy, to throw it into the atmosphere, where it's going to just heat up the environment. If we can heat a swimming pool, which is probably a council swimming pool, in the UK, councils are being really squeezed for costs, so they stop heating, they close resources down. If those resources can be kept open with heat generated somewhere else that would have been wasted, then this is a beautiful example of a closed loop, isn't it?
And they give it away for free.
Yeah.
That's the criteria. The criteria is that energy has to be given away for free to those places where it will make the most difference. And that's just remarkable. It's just absolutely remarkable. So yeah, there's some fascinating stuff going on. There's some really fascinating stuff.
But obviously, I got to meet you at Sustainability Live, or heard you at Sustainability Live, and then bothered you on LinkedIn, and you were kind enough to answer back. So thank you for that. It was interesting, in talking about data centers. Obviously, not all of the data centers are pushing their excess heat and energy into swimming pools and the like. And I think you came up with a stat that in Ireland, more energy is used in data centers than in urban housing. And obviously that's only going to increase. I know there was another example of Meta wanting to open in a data center in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands actually said, you will break our grid if you do that. So they refused them. How do we move forward in a way that is much more sustainable? And I'm thinking, we talk about data centers and saying, oh, well, we only use sustainable energy. But of course, are the data centers responsible for producing that energy? Should they all have solar panels on their roof? Do they have solar panels on their roof? What's happening, in that sort of data center industry? Is there some people who are taking the sustainability really seriously and some who frankly aren't that bothered about it.
Everybody's bothered about it. I'm quite rare working in the tech industry in that I'm a bit of a fan of legislation. And
Yeah,
we have the CSRD legislation that is coming live now,
yeah,
which is Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, where organizations at and above a certain size have to report. Have to. It's not. It's like GDPR now. It was, plenty of time was given. You had to implement safeguards for people's data. If you're a certain size now, you have to report on your sustainability metrics. So absolutely everybody is paying attention to it. Even I travel extensively. I have a fairly wide remit. Even in places that you would think, oh wow, surely they don't care about sustainability. In China they have just
mm,
enacted legislation like CSRD. The US has just enacted legislation like CSRD. It's just happening everywhere. There's a slow tide of change that is gathering speed that says the days of being unaccountable for what you do and produce are over.
mm.
And we're in that first phase now, or we're exiting that first phase now, where you simply have to report on it. And the next phase that comes after it is, now you've reported on it. Now you need to do something about it.
You need to reduce.
You need to reduce. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's so. If I'm a CEO of an organization and I produce widgets, and my widgets have a carbon inventory associated with producing them, and it's highly competitive, I'm going to focus on the things that I need to focus on, which is growth, technology,
Mm.
and people. The sacred pyramid of any CEO. If then for me to produce my widgets in a sustainable way costs me 10%, that's 10% of my margin, and I'm probably not going to do it because not everybody around me who's producing widgets is doing it.
Mm.
But if legislation says to produce a widget, you now need to report on and reduce your greenhouse gases, then the first one to do it sustainably actually wins. And I think that's the point we're at now. So I'm expecting within the next couple of years to see real significant improvements in general. I don't want to say corporate behavior in the implication that they've been bad, but you do what you need to do to be profitable at what it is that you do, right? And so now the pressure is changing, and I think good things are going to come as a result.
And obviously I've never been to a data center. Maybe I need to come to one of yours at some point just to see what they look like. But would most data centers now be using their roofs to put solar panels on, for example, to try and mitigate, or are they, saying that they'll take sustainable energy from somewhere else, or are
So
they using the grid?
I believe that and I'm not an expert in that level of data centers, but in the conversations that I've had, I believe that what they're doing, I know, for example, Amazon is investing in their own energy supplies
Hmm.
because they have a product that they need to sell, which is uptime of their cloud. And an essential component of the uptime of their cloud is being able to power it. And if energy grids aren't reliable, then they can't sell their product, right? Their
Yeah.
product is unreliable. So I know that Amazon and I know that Microsoft, and I'm certain that Google are as well, are investing significant sums of money in their own energy supplies.
Yeah.
I believe in the US, one of those hyperscalers is actually, I don't know, second or third largest energy supplier in the US as a result of this, the need to do that. And generally, when they invest in energy, they invest in green energy. So,
Yeah.
so I have great hopes that Amazon, for example, who's one of the biggest consumers of energy in Ireland, I have great hopes that they are investing tons of money in offshore wind farms and maybe onshore wind farms and renewable energy supplies so that they can then start positively contributing. Well, they are already, it's
Yeah.
false to
But
say
even
that they
more
would
so.
need to start, but to continue and to do
Yeah,
more
to do more.
and to do more in that space. Yeah.
How confident do you feel? I'm still a man of hope. I've been very interested in the environment for, well, probably 50 years. I decided to become a vet when I was 8 and I'm now 58. So it's 50 years with that sort of love of animals, but also very early on getting that connection that animals, people and the planet all kind of were related, and we had to have an holistic approach. And actually, just because I wanted to be a vet didn't mean that I didn't care about people and so on. So I think we can solve, humans have been shown to solve big problems in the past. And I think entrepreneurs, big companies, we can solve problems. There was the great horse manure crisis of the 1890s, the big conference in New York. How can we solve this problem? Because we're going to end up with, 10 foot of horse shit on the streets because we've got so many horses. And the conference in 1894 broke up after about 4 days because they couldn't come up with a solution. But of course, it was clever men like Henry Ford, Rolls and Royce, and Daimler and Benz that solved the problem. Again, causing potentially another problem. So, as I said before, we're a virtual company. You're obviously a virtual company, and I think we're beginning to solve some of those problems, reducing, travel in the case of Webinar Vet, but potentially causing another problem. How confident are you just generally in that whole sort of sustainability regeneration space, not just within your own industry, but that we can get these problems solved? Are humans clever enough to solve this?
Undoubtedly.
And AI as well, of course.
Humans are undoubtedly clever enough to solve it. But I come back to my point around legislation. Legislation is going to be needed because when you motivate CEOs, or when CEOs are motivated to do what it is that their company does, to do something different simply because it's good, requires a step change, an absolute step change, and then they turn the focus of the organization. I've seen it internally in my own organization. We are at that cusp now where we opened up the program at the beginning of early last year, to any employee who wanted to contribute sustainability ideas. We called it a sustainability innovation group, and it whittled down fairly quickly to a small number of people. But my gosh, they were passionate. And the commitment that was given to them is that if they had an idea, one of our SVP, senior vice presidents, would find the owner who would implement that idea. We couldn't guarantee it would be implemented, but we could guarantee that their idea would be heard. And they would have a sort of a Shark Tank moment when they could sell their idea, why it's good for the company. And it's these levels of constant discussions and the constant gentle pressure, and sometimes not so gentle, that actually will result in significant change. So our CEO from the top is sustainably committed. The head of my division, an Icelandic guy, he has founded a company in Iceland, and it's to enable better recycling because he cares about it, right? And so these personal things are bleeding into the organizations, and they're shifting across everything that we do. They're shifting behaviors, and then of course we have, you mentioned it, right? AI coming along. AI it's not there yet, my opinion. A lot of people will disagree with me and say it is. Okay. But it's the great promise that AI is going to solve so many of our issues. Will it? I don't know if it's going to solve all of our issues, but let's just give an example. My car, I might be tired at the end of the day, and I'm driving, paying attention, but it's been a long day. My eyes are tired. I've been on screens or whatever. My car is never tired. My car is always looking. It's always paying attention. It's always looking for those pedestrians or the cyclists or the dog or anything. It's never not doing it. And that's not really AI, but that is machine-trained behavior across hundreds of thousands of hours. And I don't know the metrics of how many lives have been saved, but I would bet you it's a great number of lives have been saved as a result of this technology. And this is just the start of it.
Yeah.
But in order to get through the trough to where we start really benefiting, I think, in terms of like the human condition or sustainability or the condition of the planet, I think we need to go down first. And some of those conversations around these massive data centers that suck up all the energy and generate tons of heat, I think we have to go through that phase. And so, I get on stages like where you and I met to try to encourage people to not keep doing the same things with this radically changed world and expect it to be okay. We've never dealt I'm not talking about me at NetApp, I'm talking about us as humanity. We've never dealt with the quantity of data that we are dealing with now, and it is growing at a rate it's absolutely inconceivable. By 2030, every single human being on the planet, this is a 256 gig iPhone. By 2030, we could give every single human being on the planet 512 of these. That's the quantity of data we are producing. And that data needs to be powered and cooled and all those sorts of things. We have to be smart about it.
And there's a personal responsibility. We've obviously talked about government. We've talked about big companies, NetApp, Amazon, IBM, etc. But we also have a responsibility. Maybe when we're going to send that document out to 20 people, do we really need to send it to 20? Is it 2 people that need to have that email? So do we need to store all those photographs? So there's a responsibility on a personal level as well, isn't there?
I think we all have a couple of responsibilities, right? We all have a number. Number one, do you need that thing, whatever that thing is? Do you need to buy it? Do you need to use it? Do you need to store it? Do you need to keep it? Whatever. That's and I don't think we need to drop into poverty mentality modes, but let's be a little more responsible about our own things. Let's just be mindful about things. I'm a very keen photographer. My camera's just there.
Yeah.
And I will go out and I will take 2,000 photographs of birds and I'll publish 3.
Yeah.
So what do I do with the other 1,997? I used to just keep them because it was consequence free. Now I go on a photo walk. I do one round of culling and I generally delete 80% of the photographs, and I delete them. They're gone. They're not coming back. But also, so that's a personal thing. But it's like, my phone is a few years old. Do I need a new one? No, not really. Is what's wrong with the old one? Just that way of thinking, and that's behavioral changes. I'm a tech guy. I come from a tech industry. The shiniest, flashiest things are always what I want.
Yes.
But I don't think it's necessary to do that. And then there's the behavior that we can exert in a workspace. So maybe it is necessary to send that attachment to 20 of your colleagues, but then invest in technology that says that email doesn't go out, or the attachment doesn't go to everybody until they need it, until they access it. So you send it to 20, maybe 3 read it, so the 3 will get it. That saved you 17 out of 20 copies of that data, which is tiny, but multiply that by the responsible people in the planet, and suddenly that's not such a tiny number anymore. And I think the other thing that we all have to do, really all have to do this, is particularly your audience, smart people, very smart people. I used to be a medic, and I worked with I was a volunteer paramedic in Johannesburg, and I worked with a disproportionately high number of vets who were in the crews with me.
Yeah.
And it was always exciting going to an incident when you are surrounded by vets, because they would discuss whether they were going to treat this patient like a bear or a St. Bernard. That was usually the discussion, as how we were going to do it. But clever people, right? So use that intelligence. What are your sources of information? Are you being manipulated in your sources of information? If you unpack what you're being told, is it to support a behavior that doesn't really involve change and abdicates an entity of its accountability in your responsibility? In other words, massive pollution is not the fault of big enterprise, and it's not the fault of manufacturing. It's because you didn't delete your photographs, right? So unpack that and think, I'm not sure I agree with that. So use your brains and be positive about how you share that information with people. That's we can't take the view that it's all hopeless, because I don't think it is. But imagine if you could influence a few people to behave differently. What a wonderful thing that would be.
Paul, with that moment of hope, I think we'll stop the podcast. But it's been absolutely fantastic speaking to you. Thank you so much for giving of your time, because I know how busy you are. But
Hey, my
I
pleasure.
think if we all do a little bit, it adds up to a lot, doesn't it?
Right. Exactly that. Exactly that. Don't believe that it's pointless because it's not. I don't think it is. I don't think it's pointless. I think a lot of small changes equals big change. That's what I go on.
Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Hope to see you on a podcast or a webinar very soon. This has been Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, and this has been VETchat. Take care. See you soon. Bye.